Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is what I finished reading recently. First is The Battle Drum by Sarat El-Arifi. This is the second book in the... oh geez. I just forgot. The Ending Fire trilogy. The first book is The Final Strife, which I read last year and reread earlier this year to continue with this book. And this is a rebellion fantasy and follows two main characters who were switched at birth. In this world, there are people that are, there's a hierarchical system by blood color instead of like skin color. So everyone in the world so far has been black, but there are different colors of blood. Red, blue, clear, these kinds of things. And so there's a hierarchical society based on that. And the blue-blooded people started a rebellion years ago, and they were swapping kids with the Embers. So Dusters are blue-bloods, Embers are red-blooded, and the Embers are the people in charge. So they broke in and swapped a bunch of babies that were families of people in power. And one of the girls, the Ember, was raised as part of this like rebellion, and the other one was raised in like this place of power, even though they had different blood and stuff. So I won't go into exactly everything that started with the first book because spoilers, but the second book is much more of an expanse on the world. The world expands a lot, and you discover that there's a lot more going on than just what's going on within the political machinations of the first book. So you're getting a lot more of that. The characters are going on diverging paths to kind of still meet the same goal, and it's just more of this like world building thing. I will say that there was more of like a slumpy feeling to this one, like a second book slump. It was still interesting, but it felt a little bit more like filler. I think the third book is going to pick back up again, but I really enjoyed this series. There's a sapphic representation in here. Obviously everyone is a person of color in this series thus far. There is trans rep. There is like disability and drug use and like drug recovery representation. So yeah, lots going on in this series. If you can hang with slightly unlikable characters, this is definitely something that you should check out. I recently did an audio review for the books in the series that are more in-depth, and that is on my Patreon. So I'm doing a more in-depth audio reviews on Patreon. That's the Bibliothecary. It's linked down below if you want to hear more about these books. Then I read Where Peace is Lost by Valerie Valdez. This is a standalone adult science fiction story, and I really enjoyed this. I really like Valerie Valdez's books. The first series of hers that I haven't quite finished yet, I need to read the third book still, is sort of like a, I would say like a spin on Mass Effect. It's very heavily inspired by Mass Effect, but it also has a lot of like comedy in it. This one is a little more serious, and I actually end up really enjoying it. It's about this woman who is, we don't know at the beginning like what exactly happened, but she's a part of some society in this like universe, in this galaxy, and she is very afraid of being discovered by this like ruling, dominating, colonizing force that is just like decimates, like it's fascism, it just decimates everything. So she's been sort of hiding away and becoming a bit of a hermit on this one planet that is very peaceful, and then one day one of the machines of that colonizing force gets activated, and so she gets pulled into like trying to deactivate that, and two mercenaries from off-planet come, and she kind of gets pulled into that. And it's a story about like grief and recovering from grief and a little bit of like found family and finding romance again and coming to terms with who you are and who you've been and what you've done and what you will do. So I really enjoyed it. It packs a pretty heavy punch for a standalone, and it's very interesting. If she expands on this world, I wouldn't mind. There's some really cool things about this world, and there's also really good romance. Valerie Valdez does really good sci-fi romantic subplots, and there's really good romance in here too that I really enjoyed. So I'm looking forward to more of what she puts out, and I gave this one 4 stars. Then I read The Infinity Alchemist by Case and Callender. This is the first book in a young adult, I guess mostly fantasy, possibly. I think it's going to be a duology, maybe a trilogy, but I think at least for sure a duology. And this is about a character who gets pulled into a sort of like race to find a magical book about alchemy. And in this world, like to be an alchemist, which is the main magic user, you have to have like gone to school and like be licensed to be an alchemist. He can do alchemy, but isn't licensed and doesn't really know, like has never had formal training. So he approaches this younger professor at the school that I can't remember now if he was going to the school or if he was working at the school. I think he's working at the school. So he wants to go to the school, whatever. But approaches this professor and kind of gets roped into potentially finding this book of power. And everything kind of goes from there. What is interesting about this is like a pretty short book that packs a pretty big punch, but it has this like dark academia plot line. And this book is incredibly queer. I mean, this is Case and Callender, so they're going to have a lot of like queerness and representation here. So it's queer, but also polyamorous. So there's a polyamorous story that you're like, is it going to be a love triangle? Is it going to be polyamory? And it's polyamory. My one complaint about this, whenever I see polyamory at this point, this is sort of like when we were getting more representation for sexualities in books, that it always looked a certain way. When you get rep for polyamory in books, it's always a triad. And triads are the most unstable form of polyamory. It's polyamory on hard mode. And for some reason, it works really well in books because it just seems to fit really perfectly. It's a polyfidelitous, is that the word? It's polyfidelity with a triad. And that is just not usually how it works, especially organically like this. But anyway, I'll take what I can get when it comes to polyamory rep. But that is sort of what this book is about. And so it's this like mystery and this love story. What I will say is because it was so short generally, there kind of wasn't enough room for all of it. Like some of the love story stuff felt very rushed and like a little bit unbelievable. Like I had to suspend some disbelief for some things because it was like these people are getting really close really fast for all this to be working out in this way. And some of the things about just like the mystery and the like, you know, questness of it all felt very rushed. But overall, enjoyable. And I will probably continue with this series once the next book comes out. Like I said, there's trans rep in here, and gender fluid, and polyamory, and queerness. And most of the characters are people of color. And yeah, there's just a lot going on. And the vibes are good. I gave this about a 3.5. This is heavier. There's some trigger warnings for like child abuse and torture, so there's some darker elements here for sure. Speaking of dark, we have A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. So good. This is following our main character of Effie, who goes to this architecture school, even though she wants to be a part of the literary college, but women are not allowed in the literary college, but she is obsessed with this one famous author who has recently passed. And she ends up seeing a ad for someone wanting to design the house in memorial to this author who just recently passed. So she's invited to go to his like estate to build his house because her design like wins. This happens at the very beginning. And she is running away from a lot of stuff. She has pretty severe mental health things where she is like has pretty high anxiety, isn't sure about like hallucinations and things that she's had her whole life that all revolve around the Fairy King. The Fairy King is also a character within this man's works. And she also had a sexual assault occur with one of her professors that she is wanting to get away from because it is very traumatizing. So she goes, and when she gets there, she discovers that another student from the literary college is already there and is actually trying to disprove everything about this author that she loves. And so, and there's also like a ton of weird shit going on at this estate. So there's all of this stuff like steeped in magic and like uncertainty and like really exploring like trauma and everything and stories and who's in charge of stories, who creates stories, and you know, power imbalances and like misogyny. And then there's this like budding sort of what is this between her and the other boy that are there, and it's just so good. The imagery, this is like, I've talked about this as being like a little bit like Crimson Peak, but instead of ghost it's fae, and instead of like blood it's water. Those are the vibes, and they're immaculate. Ava Reed can never do anything wrong in my eyes. They are perfect. Everything they write is perfect. The aesthetic of everything is perfect. I was not surprised about this. This is 5 out of 5 stars for sure. But like I mentioned, some heavy triggers for sexual assault, very, very present, main theme of the book, and just like sort of like drowning and like imprisonment and stuff like that. So just be aware of that. Then I read Shield Maiden by Sharon Emmerich. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce this, but this is essentially a standalone Beowulf retelling, but instead of following Beowulf, it's following, one, the end of his life, so the story that we don't tend to hear about a lot when we study it in school. I mean, a lot of Americans especially study it in school. I'm sure Brits do too. But usually we study like the Grendel's mom thing. There's also a story apparently at the end of Beowulf's life that is about a dragon. And so we're covering that part of the story, but instead of following him, we're following a shield maiden, someone that is in his extended family who wants to be a shield maiden, but as a child, she was horribly injured and is now doesn't have use of one of her hands. And her father is not very supportive of her becoming a shield maiden, so she's been training her entire life to try to be one. And she also has this budding relationship with a slave that was in her father's employ, who was taken from his family by raiders. This is taking place during sort of like, again, ancient Britain, and everything that's kind of happening there, very like Viking kind of time period. So yeah, this is following them, and it sort of is weaving in and out with like the perspectives and everything. And I enjoyed this enough for what it was, but I wasn't like blown away by it. I think a lot of books that have been sort of retellings of myths from this time period or whatever have been better. This was heavily romance centered. I would say that the plot of this is most heavily focused on the romance and the budding romance between these two. And then there's just a lot of plot points. Like it felt like a lot of jumping to like what horrible thing can be done to this woman. Like it was a lot of like trauma, which is again historically accurate, but it also felt like some of the villain and antagonist stuff was a little bit mustache swirling and just felt like it lacked a bit of complexity. Like it felt very simple and stale in a lot of ways, but there was parts of it that still kept me going. The characters were really interesting and like lovable, but like the villains and some of the plot points felt very one note. I gave this one 3 stars. Then I reread The First Sister by Lyndon A. Lewis. This is the first book in a sci-fi trilogy. I reread this so that I could continue with this series. We did a House Salt book club on this like years ago when we first read this, so I will link that on the screen for more in-depth thoughts. But this I continued to like on a second read. It was good that I reread it because I had forgotten some things. This has 2 different plots that sort of end up converging, one following people who are from like Earth and Mars has sort of formed like a group, and then Venus and Mercury has sort of formed a group in the future. And like one, you know, Earth sort of has this like very Handmaid's Tale-esque society and like religion. And then the other group has like pairs of people that are soldiers, and we're like sort of following plots with both of those. But I needed a lot of reminders of some of the like plot elements and things, so I'm glad I reread this before getting onto the second book, but still really enjoyed this. This gives me like some of the sci-fi like fast-paced intense vibes of like a Red Rising or something. But yeah, like I really enjoy these, and I always feel like very on the edge of my seat, and I really enjoy the characters in there. So I'm excited to continue with this series. Still 4 out of 5 stars for me. Then I read Fae Bound by Sarah El-Arifi. This is also the same author that wrote The Battle Drum, so this is her new series in which there are humans, or there were humans, fae, and elves. And these all infought for a while, and now only elves are a thing, and so we're following 2 sisters, one who is a high up military person and ends up getting expelled and like banished from the tribe basically because of disobeying orders kind of, and she's in love with the like leader, and she ends up getting banished, and then her sister ends up following her. And what ends up happening is she ends up going into the woods and hunting this type of creature that they use for making like their magic and for divination and for lots of things, and they're like a very highly prized prize basically. And she ends up getting basically taken in by Fae, not taken in, like held prisoner by Fae, because she kills one of these beings and ends up discovering that Fae are still a thing that are real, and the Fae are very connected to these creatures, and she just committed a horrible crime. So she gets taken, her sister ends up following her, and so we end up following both of their like paths as they are taken into the like Fae world, and discovers that the Fae world is real and that they didn't know a lot about what was going on, and the connections for the Fae world and the Elven world and all of that. This was just solidly fine. There are triggers in here for animal death because of like that hunting stuff. But it was just kind of like fine. I enjoy the other series more, the Ending Fire series more. I just wasn't super connected to these characters. Again, just kind of fine. I don't really see myself continuing with the series because I think that I'll forget a lot of stuff as time goes on. But like some of the stuff about like the world building, about the Fae and like versus the elves and things were cool. There was some like romantic elements in here that I like pulled for, but wasn't like shipping super hard. It was just sort of fine. So yeah, there were some twists and stuff, but I prefer her other series, and I gave this one like maybe 2.5 to 3 stars, but like I think 3 is just fine. Like it was just okay. Then I read Mislaid in Parts Half Known by Shauna Maguire. This is the 8th book in the Wayward Children series, and this we're bringing it back to basically every other book in this series either follows one of the kids' storylines of going through the doors, or because it's a portal fantasy in which kids go into different magical worlds and then they get spit back out by those magical worlds, and then they end up in this school for children who have gone through portal worlds. And then so either we're following a kid's story or we're following like all of the kids doing a thing like together kind of. And this is one of the all the kids doing a thing together stories, and I really enjoy those ones like the most. There's a few exceptions. I do like a few of the like origin stories, but I tend to like when all the kids are together and we get to hear about like all of their worlds and all of their journeys, and some of the kids want to return to their worlds, some of the kids don't. And this is really a continuation of the last book in which we discover that there's sort sort of like some nexus worlds in which a bunch of doors connect to one world. And so we sort of close out that story with that character a little bit more. And then a few other characters also get stories kind of wrapped up. So this really felt like a nice culmination of a lot of things. And for a while there, this series was sort of feeling like it was getting lackluster. I really liked the beginning of the series, and then the middle was having a little bit of like a lull, and it feels like it's picking back up again. The last couple books of this series I've really enjoyed. So I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. Glad that it's getting back, hitting its stride. And then lastly and most recently, I finished The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. This is a standalone adult fantasy story that is taking place in Golden Age Spain. This is a multiple POV story that's mostly following our main character of Luisa, who can do like little miracles, basically. She was raised multi-religious kind of, like obviously this is during the Inquisition and stuff and you're supposed to be Catholic, but it comes from a Jewish family and also like a bunch of sort of amalgamations of things that she was taught. And so she can do these like little miracles, and one day the woman that she works for, who's very cruel to her, discovers these, and like it sort of sets her on a path to be involved in much more like political machination stuff and potentially going before the king and just getting wrapped up in a lot. There's also a romantic subplot between one of the people that she eventually meets, who's also been wrapped into like magic and you know, sort of like imprisoned for magic and things. And it's sort of the story of like different sort of cultures and trying to keep your culture, but also like what is freedom versus what is sort of like being held captive by someone, and like choosing your own path and some of this stuff. I'm saying all of this is like sort of very vaguely because this book worked in some ways for me and then not for others. This like it was just fine. There are triggers in here for torture, like heavy torture scene, anti-Semitism and misogyny that's taking place in this world and in this time period. But like this felt like it had so many pieces that were so good. This like religious trauma element, this like this stuff about like women and relationships that women have with men, and that like wanting more and some of that. Like there was all these little pieces, especially because we're getting different POVs here and there, but it just like not quite enough. Like it needed something else. It was missing like a little bit of oomph. So like parts of the world building were cool, but like needed a little bit more. Parts of those like themes of some of like the cultural stuff, the religious stuff, the relationship stuff just needed more. I enjoyed the themes of this relationship that was happening, but I also just wanted like a little bit more. Like part of me is like, would this need to be a duology? Do we just not have enough time? I don't know, but this wasn't Leigh's strongest work. Definitely. I'm glad that she's getting away from Grishaverse. I'll be forever grateful that she's getting away from Grishaverse, but I just know that she can do better than this, and it just felt just kind of like mid to me. So I give this about 3 stars. It was just fine. We will be talking about this for the House Help Book Club this coming weekend, so if you guys are interested in hearing more of our end of thoughts about that, then that is coming up. 3 stars. In addition to these books, I also read a number of nonfiction books on different relationship styles and witchcraft type stuff, but I am mostly going to be posting those on my Patreon, again, for more in-depth reviews there. So if you're interested, it's just $1 a month. It's a Bibliothecarius. You get access to a ton of stuff. Again, I will link that down below if you want more information. So yeah, those are the books that I've read recently. I will continue to be doing wrap-ups like this from here on out. Instead of doing monthly wrap-ups, it's just like when I have time to do a wrap-up and I've read a number of books, I'm going to be wrapping up. I also do plan on doing what I've been playing type wrap-ups, in addition, like combining those with what I've been reading wrap-ups, because I'm trying to work through a ton of games. But I first want to do a little wrap-up of a ton of the games that I've recently finished, and then just continue from there once I finish like a game a month, or you know, every other month or whatever, because I won't be playing like multiple games in a month probably and finishing them along with books. So I just want to do a little catch up, but this is how I'll be doing my wrap-ups from here on out. So hope you enjoy it, and you'll probably get them more consistently that way. So comment below, let me know what you thought of any of these books if you've read them. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.